Hopefully, by now, you've heard about our annual State of Marketing to Engineers research report. And on today's episode, I'm bringing on my research partner, CJ Haight from Global Spec, and we're going to just share some of our observations. We're not going to walk through the whole report. You can go download it yourself. You can go look at our webinar, but we'll talk about what surprised us, what we want to dig into further, what we want to caution you on not misrepresenting when you read the data. So just some good behind the scenes, kind of in the weeds information about the report. So if you haven't ever seen the report, maybe go look at that either before or after you listen to this episode. All right, let's do this.
Welcome to Content Marketing Engineered, your source for building trust and generating demand with technical content. Here is your host, Wendy Covey.
Hi, and welcome to Content Marketing Engineered. On each episode, I'll break down an industry trend, challenge, or best practice in reaching technical audiences. You'll meet colleagues, friends, and clients of mine who will stop by to share their stories. And I hope that you leave each episode feeling inspired and ready to take action. Before we jump in, I'd like to give a brief shout out to my agency, True Marketing. True is a full-service agency located in beautiful Austin, Texas, serving highly technical companies. For more information, visit truemarketing.com. And now, on with our podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Content Marketing Engineered. I'm joined today by my research partner in crime, CJ Haight from Global Spec. He's the Senior Marketing Manager over there. Welcome back to the show once again, CJ.
Hi, Wendy. Thank you so much for having me. It is great to be here. Looking forward to this conversation.
You know, I should go back and count how many times you've been on the show. Do you know offhand?
This might be like my fourth or fifth.
I'm
honestly, I've lost track myself.
Nice. Well, we just saw each other a few months ago at the Industrial Marketing Summit where we previewed our research report. We were in the final stages of putting it together. And since then, we've released it to the wild. We've held a webinar. We've gotten lots of feedback over the report. So I thought today, maybe we would just take a different perspective than those other presentations and just talk about like what surprised you and what you thought about the data and the research, just some of the things that stood out. And maybe we can get into a little bit of, pulling back the curtain on how this is all put together. How does that sound to you?
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I loved presenting at IMS with you. And then we had our webinar as well, where we kind of like dove into the data and presented it that way. So I think jumping into a conversation, pulling back the curtain, and just kind of talking about how we feel about the research, it's a nice change of pace.
Yeah, great. Okay. 9 years now. I'm so excited about celebrating next year, the 10th year anniversary.
I've been thinking about it over and over, like how are we going to do next year's and improve on it and like really celebrate 10 years of this research. It's really exciting.
Heck yeah. We're looking forward to that first planning meeting, which I think is starting like in a week or two. So it's a year-round thing that we do here. But for now, let's focus on the 2026 research. And just what was your biggest aha moment when you looked at it?
Yeah, well, a lot of great research in the report. I think one of the biggest aha moments for me, at least, was seeing technical publications overtake supplier and vendor websites with where technical buyers go for researching information. We've seen the growth of online technical publications on that list kind of getting closer and closer to vendor websites. Last year, we saw them tie, and then this year, for the first time, we saw that switch where online technical publications took first place there.
CJ, I had this as mine too. That was a big moment, and it didn't just slightly go above it. It's really the past couple of years just keeps growing in popularity. So, what do you think's behind that?
Yeah, so we've seen that growth for a few years now. I think part of that growth has actually kind of come along with the age of AI. And I wonder if AI has something to do with it, with maybe pointing engineers and technical buyers towards these third-party websites compared to vendor websites. But I also think just technical buyers, they're craving for something that is non-biased, something that won't sound as salesy possibly. So finding those third-party sites where They'll be able to talk about multiple different products, multiple different vendors, possibly comparing them. That might give technical buyers the type of insight that they're really looking for, especially in the beginning stages of researching products.
I think you're onto something there, and I hope it's not because vendor websites have become a little too fluffy with abuse of generative tools. I know there's a temptation there to go fast and do quick web pages, but it can be at the expense of credibility and trust. And it's a lot easier to lose trust than it is to build trust. So I certainly hope that's not the case, but I suspect in some cases that's happening too.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, a lot of these companies are very small marketing teams. So they're trying to probably lean on AI to help them in areas like that. But that is something that, at least right now, I think engineers and technical buyers are going to be able to see through it and be able to tell that when websites are stood up by AI compared to having experts really in there helping to build those landing pages.
Doing their thing. Okay. So speaking of AI, one of the big things that we focused on was how engineers and technical buyers utilize generative AI in the research process to make a purchase. So what did you kind of take away from that piece?
So this is really interesting. I think that some of our data around AI almost contradicts each other because we are seeing that AI adoption is increasing. We're seeing that these technical buyers are using more AI when it comes to researching these products. But at the same time, trust is not budging at all. It seems that their trust level is still fairly low. We had a 4.7 average for our respondents this year, so it's still under 5. But if they're using more AI within researching these products and adopting that more, then it has to kind of, in my opinion, mean that they're not utilizing it to necessarily find the information that they're going to move forward with, but they might utilize it as a starting place, some place to start out to kind of maybe gather just a little bit of information, or possibly even use it to find the resources a little faster than you might be able to through traditional search, finding information at your fingertips a little faster, and then using that to dive in further, find original sources, make sure that information is accurate. It's really interesting kind of seeing this dynamic of they're using it, but they're not trusting it. And I'm really curious to see how far that might go in future years. Do we keep seeing the adoption of AI without any kind of trust increase, or do we start to see the trust budge a little bit? That's going to be really interesting to keep following.
I was surprised that use wasn't even higher than what showed up in the report. And I can't help but think that either people don't want to admit to how much they're using it, or maybe it's just changed, since we had this survey in the field about 6 or 7 months ago. So really interested to look at that adoption. I'm with you on the trust thing. So it feels like it's the shortcut to do research, but then a lot of verification happens afterwards. Yeah, all over. And then of course we asked about Google versus generative, like large language models like Gemini and Claude and ChatGPT. And Google by far had more of the market share of use over those large language models, which echoes the broader just population and what we see of use patterns. I wonder if that'll flip at all, or people will stay with Google given that there's an answer engine attached to it. You have any opinions on that?
Yeah, something that I think is also kind of leans into this is how often are they recognizing that they're using AI off the bat, especially with the changes that Google has made in kind of creating large language model answers to a traditional Google search. And when we asked this question 6 months ago, that was still somewhat new, I think, and Google was testing that quite a bit. So at the time of asking this question, it was even more of an unknown that technical buyers might have had when they were using traditional search, what kind of answers they were getting back, and whether they were recognizing that that was an AI answer or not. So I think that definitely leans into it. And we're also seeing something else interesting that came out of the traditional search data is that it seems that technical buyers are less resistant to ads being in their search results. A few years ago, back in 2023, we saw that over half were resistant to ads in those search results. And now we're seeing that drop down to, I believe it was 42% this past year. So that's also really interesting to see, kind of this acceptance of seeing ads at the top of results, along with the growth of AI and the changeover possibly from something like traditional search to using a large language model. But you're right, still, it was 75% of our respondents were saying that they were going to traditional search over AI, which is very interesting, along with all the other data that we're talking about around AI.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you brought up the advertising aspects because I just saw my first ad in ChatGPT. So it's starting, it's coming, they're testing it, I think. And so now we have at least an indicator of how engineers are going to deal with those ads. Now, I don't know if they'll deal with them differently when they're served up within a large language model, well, the jury's still out on that, but here we go again.
Yeah,
More change is on the horizon and more channels to consider and ways to spread your budget out
I
and to
know.
decide where to place bets, right?
Yeah, we have to think completely differently now that we're in this world of AI, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. So when you think about all the data in the report, is there anything that like surface level, if you just looked at a chart, might be misinterpreted if you didn't read the full report or was wearing your thinking cap, as my mom would say as a marketer?
Yeah, a few things that I would say. The first is that when we're looking at the age breakout of our respondents, if we look at the younger engineers, it's a bit of a lighter respondent rate for our younger respondents. So keeping that in context when looking through the report, seeing some of the age breakouts, not thinking about the data along with those younger technical buyers as like definite proof of this is the direction we need to go in, but maybe looking at that more as a possible guiding light that we can look towards. So that's definitely one thing I would keep in mind when looking through this report. And another thing as well is just the amount of data. Like we've kind of talked about how some of the data contradicts itself. So thinking about the nuances throughout this report, there's a lot of data there. So when you're going through it, keeping that in mind, keeping the idea of these technical buyers are filling out a survey, thinking about themselves and their own experiences. So trying to, when you look at this data, try to see it from their eyes and understand why they might leave certain answers, and what might be the cause of that, or what might be the possibility of, hey, were they lying about their usage of AI? And keeping those thoughts in mind too.
Yeah, yeah. Is anything embarrassing? Like, I don't want to admit that I go to Instagram all the time or whatever for work. We have this one chart that's one of our benchmarking questions we ask year after year, and it has to do with information sources. And it's worded, what information sources do you regularly go to when making a purchase or researching to make a purchase? And that one to me is interesting because the things that fall towards the bottom that people go to less frequently can be interpreted like, oh, we shouldn't do those things. And those things include social media and large language models, right? But then you see as we go through the rest of the report that no, actually they go to those sources too. They just more often go to technical publications, vendor websites, what else? Trade shows, associations. So it's one to me that you look at, but you don't just base your whole budget allocation based on that one chart.
Yeah, that's a really good call out too. I like that because part of this too, and part of the conversation we're having here is just because they end up going to the vendor website or they go to the technical publication doesn't mean that that's where they're starting. That might not be where they're originally gathering information. They might be starting at AI or Google or even some social media platforms. So
Yeah.
making sure that we are represented everywhere so we show up in those initial searches, I think is incredibly important and something to definitely keep in mind. I like that answer a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how about we did a lot of regional data and, of course, brought in our collaborator elector. Was there anything that stood out to you as, oh, these things are universal, but these things are really hyper localized or at least regionalized? Anything
Yeah, a
stick
few
out?
things, definitely. In terms of thinking about like what's localized or regionalized, something that we saw that I thought was pretty interesting in this year's report was the podcast listening around the world and how large we kind of saw that difference in Africa and APAC of people listening to podcasts there. Not like it's a huge difference, but I think that there was a significant increase in people listening in those regions, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, there were some big swings. I had thought about the trust in AI and how there were some regional differences there. And I guess it's not surprising. We know, given the need for privacy and distrust of technology a little bit more in Europe, that they were on the lowest end. And then Asia Pac was the most trusting of
Mhm.
AI. And then we North Americans were somewhere in the middle. So that one was another one I remember.
Yeah, that was interesting. And I think it kind of points to like when we're using AI to create content, what audience that content is for. If we're creating content for technical buyers in APAC, then they might be more receptive to some AI content compared to someone in Europe who might
Yeah.
absolutely hate that idea, which, yeah, I think is interesting for us to kind of be thinking about. And it's some behaviors that I saw that were kind of worldwide that I thought were really interesting and somewhat obvious, but still something I'd like to point out is the want of having technical experts creating content. That was something that we did see worldwide. That was like the top answer for respondents. And then also the preference for independent sources as well was pretty high up there for respondents worldwide. So I think no matter who you're speaking to, both of those aspects are important to keep in mind.
Yeah, good ones. How about anything did we have a lot of different industries that are represented in this study? Anything stand out from one industry to another?
Oh man, good question. There is actually nothing coming to mind for me in terms of industry differences. Is there one that you have?
I think it's interesting for the lack of differences. Every
Mm.
time, almost every single year we do this report, we break down a few of the industries for certain events. So I remember we've done, I think last year it was industrial automation and control. The year before that, we took electronics and semiconductor. We've done AEC before, and it always mirrors the global results, like
Yeah.
always that we have never really seen a deviation by industry. And that just shows that technical buyer behavior kind of trumps it. This style of working, this style of thinking, this left brain kind of person. That's at least how I look at it because we haven't found any remarkable differences.
Yeah, nothing that I would say is worth noting at all.
Yeah.
I think you're right that for the most part, when across industries, these technical buyers are kind of looking for the same thing, and that's technical information that they can access that is from a non-biased source, and hopefully offering them all the technical specs that they need.
See, it was a trick question and you passed there. I'm kidding. Okay, so say you're listening, you lead a marketing organization. What would you recommend they stop doing tomorrow and where should they double down?
Well, if they, like we said earlier, if they are using AI to stand up their websites, if they're using AI to create content, especially if they're using AI to just create content at a mass level, trying to create as much content as possible, that is something that I would definitely give a hard stop to think very hard about the type of content that is being created and how much of this is truly just AI slop, honestly. And when a technical buyer runs into that, that is going to do nothing but hurt your brand, I think, in terms of the credibility that that buyer is going to see your brand having. So I would think heavily about using AI to create content, especially if you have any kind of technical experts at your company who can help you with
Mhm.
creating that content. I think that that is a much more important place to go. In terms of doubling down, I would say doubling down with uh, making sure that you are represented on third-party websites. Something I think that is important, especially with the age of AI and the growth of AI, is being able to be found all over the internet. The more places that you are found on the internet, the more likely that AI will be to source you, will be to recognize you when someone is asking a question about products that you might sell. So I think that that's important. Be represented in third-party, unbiased sources. Work with them as partners. Make sure you're involved at trade shows as well. That's another great pinpoint that AI could grab you from. Social media, of course. And don't think of your own website as like the first touch point. Think of it as possibly down the line, and the first touch point is likely happening elsewhere on the internet.
Very good point. Yeah. And I will add on, I love that advice. I wrote down my own response to this question. It was very similar to yours. I will just add, make sure that you're differentiated, your messaging about your company and your solutions, because if you sound like everyone else, you're not going to stand out. You're not going to do well with search and large language models. You have to have a unique position and then repeat that and stay loyal to that concept or that content theme, whether it's on your site or other sites as well. So that's kind of like, I guess, the strategy below what you're saying. So be found on those third-party sites, but be unique when you're found. Don't just sound like everybody else, because then you're just, get lost in the noise of the competitors.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So we're about to kick off 2027 and oh, good Lord. And when we run the research again, I mean, obviously we're going to have our benchmarking questions and our new ones. And I can't wait to hear what new ideas you have. What do you think will look different?
Well, I think it'll be really interesting to follow AI adoption and see if that increases even further. Like you said, you were expecting it to be even higher this year. So I'll be I'll be really looking forward to seeing where that goes in 2027. And if we see the trust scale nudge up at all a little bit, if we see technical buyers having a little bit more trust in working with AI, or if we continue to see a lack of trust, but an increase in adoption, I am just so curious to see where that trend goes.
Yeah, me too. And then if this advertising on large language model platforms continues, if it rolls out in a more meaningful way, definitely want to dig into that, just like we did Google this year, excuse me. The other thing I'm keen on looking at is when we looked at the buyer's journey as a whole, the average was 62% of the buyer's journey is conducted online before someone talks to a vendor company. But for the under 35, it was 66%. So meaningfully more time spent online before wanting to talk to the company. So as boomers retire and a lot of millennials and younger get into purchasing seats, are we going to see even more of that journey online and more of it digital? Or, somehow are we going to move back to some face-to-face? So I'd like to keep my eye on that one too.
Yeah, that's a really good trend to call out, especially with the possibility of maybe seeing technical buyers wanting some more face-to-face interaction in the age of AI, and seeing if we do start to see a reverse on that trend. That would be really interesting. Yeah.
We may need to bring some events questions back, huh?
Maybe. Yeah, I agree.
The webinar questions are great, I thought, this year too. For those of you listening that are thinking of starting webinars or improving them, we did ask a set of questions about those that are great. We asked about newsletters and sponsored newsletters, so go check that out. Anything we didn't touch on that you loved about the report? Any pieces of data?
There's so much to cover, honestly. I love all of it. We asked some really good learning questions as well. Just check out the research report, flip through it, check out our webinar as well, where we dove into it for about an hour. I think both of those would be great resources to just have at your fingertips to make better decisions for marketing this year.
So where can people do that, CJ?
Well, they can download the research report on either True's website or Global Spec's website. You'll be able to access past research reports as well. And then you can find our webinar on those websites too.
Right. Great. Well, thanks so much for coming on again for the 4th or 5th or some time that you've been here. I really appreciate your partnership.
Thank you. Can't wait to be back next year.
Thanks for joining me today on Content Marketing Engineered. For show notes, including links to resources, visit truemarketing.com/podcast. While there, you can subscribe to our blog and our newsletter and order a copy of my book, Content Marketing Engineered. Also, I would love your reviews on this podcast. So please, when you get a chance, subscribe and leave me your review on your favorite podcast subscription platform. Thanks and have a great day.